Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we're going to be talking about the Bright Lance and whether or not its era of dominance is in fact over. So I've been wondering about this over the last couple of weeks, whether or not the Bright Lance was truly the dominant anti-large weapon that we rely on to get the job done. And I really just don't think it is anymore. At least not in a dominating way, and I don't think this is something that's really new. I think we've been kind of seeing this since the last balanced data slate. There's been a rise in marine equivalent type armies kind of dominating the scene. We've seen more, people focusing on infantry rather than vehicles, at least large vehicles. If we do see vehicles, they tend to be more on the lighter side, especially with a lot of the armies that are doing well. Orcs and Dark Eldar, for example, have lighter vehicles. The Bright Lances are a little bit overkill against, of course, still effective against them. But the real question is, are there more cost-effective answers in our army to deal with these types of targets? On the other hand, other successful armies are just running heavy stuff. Things like Land Raiders, Monoliths, and units that are kind of, still in the range of the Bright Lance to be able to deal with, but, are probably better answered by more heavy-duty anti-large weaponry. And because of those factors, I'm noticing that the Bright Lance is just falling off just a little bit. We're not seeing them as much in lists, and on a personal level, I'm not seeing them be as effective as they once were in a variety of different matchups. Now, this might not be relevant to you in your local meta and your local gaming group. You might find a very different story, that Bright Lances are still very good and that, they work against the opponents that you're playing against. And I definitely understand that. The Bright Lance by no means is a bad weapon. However, the point I'm going to try to make with this video is that, in fact, there might be other options besides just the Bright Lance that you may want to consider in your army. And this is much different from the beginning of the edition, as you guys remember, where if you could take a Bright Lance on something, you just took it, no questions asked. And of course, I think that mentality is changing. Now, there's also a balanced data slate that is coming out tomorrow, so I will have commentary on that. There's going to be point changes probably and rule changes, so Eldar might see a change, and this might change what I'm saying in this video. So take whatever I say with a grain of salt. If all of a sudden we get a bunch of fate dice back, or, there's some sort of rule change where all of a sudden Bright Lances become way more powerful again, of course, that's going to change some of the things I say in this video. But if largely we don't see any changes, then I think what I'm saying is still going to be relevant because, coming up in Pariah Nexus, we are going to see an expansion of marine equivalent battle line units in general. So expect to see that. And having said that, let's go ahead and jump right into it. All right, so in regards to the Bright Lance, we're going to be discussing the history of the Bright Lance in 10th edition briefly. We're also going to be talking about the shift in the competitive landscape since the last balanced data slate. We're going to be talking about the incoming shifts predicted in the Pariah Nexus season, what has and will replace the Bright Lance in Pariah Nexus, and lastly, how do the other Eldar weapons stack up? I'm talking about, of course, the Eldar heavy weapons that we know and love. So, as some of you guys remember, on release, the Bright Lance saw some use, but was actually overshadowed by the D weapons that at the time were extremely OP. You really didn't see a lot of Bright Lances at all. You maybe saw a couple here and there on units that were just kind of thrown in, like Warwalkers, for example, you saw them on. But realistically, having seen some of those tournament games played by Eldar armies in the very beginning of the edition, the Warwalkers were much less influential on the game than the D weapons were. So you had things like Wraith Knights being able to just mow down entire armies during the first couple turns of the game. The Warwalkers might be there to finish something off that the Wraith Knight didn't finish off, or, might be there to score a secondary objective or something like that. But in most cases, all the Fate Dice generation was getting pumped into those Wraith Knights. Now, after the nerfs to both Devastating Wounds and Wraith Knights themselves, Towering got nerfed, Mortal Wounds got changed to just ignoring armor and invuls instead of, causing one wound at a time and so forth. So there was a lot of nerfs there. But after that, Bright Lances exploded into a meta that was dominated by large units. There were tons of vehicles and monsters in this meta. You saw a lot of tough targets on the battlefield, and Bright Lancers were very well suited and very well costed at the time to be able to deal with these types of units. I mean, back then, War Walkers were much cheaper. Fire Prisms were also pretty cheap. You saw a lot of Fire Prisms on the battlefield, stuff like that. So in general, you did see a lot of Bright Lances, but they were at a much reduced cost. And of course, we had much more Fate dice to work with back then as well. Since then, we've seen several nerfs to both our army rules and our units. We've seen several point increases, and even though the Bright Lance has since seen vast use in both competitive and casual play, we've started to see a shift. So what exactly has been the shift in the competitive landscape since the last balanced data slate? Well, basically, pure and simple, armies have begun to shift away from an emphasis on heavy vehicles and monsters into more marine equivalent armies with transports. So we see this in armies like Blood Angels. We see this for armies like World Eaters, Chaos Space Marines, and stuff like that. Armies that are relying on heavy infantry to score on objectives and destroy enemy units. With the release of the Orc Codex, we're of course seeing knobs, both in Mega Armor, which are kind of like Terminators, and we're seeing the regular knobs, which are kind of just like Marines. 2 wounds, toughness 5, 4 up armor save, very similar stat line to a Space Marine. Grey Knights are, of course, the top faction as well, and they're basically, again, Marine equivalents with an extra armor save. And then lastly, we have Sisters of Battle, which are coming in. They're more fragile, but they are run in a very similar way, in transports in units of 10, and they do come with a 3+ armor save as well. So essentially, we're seeing a huge shift in both what people are using in their armies and the types of armies that are doing really well, which is armies that are dominated by this heavy infantry style of play. And this leaves the Bright Lance in a weird spot where it's not as points effective against the new meta it now faces. So that begs the question, what has and will replace the Bright Lance in Pariah Nexus now that the meta has shifted to more of a marine equivalent landscape? So with the fact that battle line units are going to be even more important, and a lot of the missions do focus on units being able to get to objectives and hold them down early, I think we're going to see a lot of the same thing. Marines in transports like Rhinos to get them up the battlefield quick, and then, try their best to hold that objective for at least one turn to score those bonus points. And I think as a direct counter to this, for the Eldar, units like Fire Dragons are going to be more efficient against both transports and Marine equivalent and Terminator equivalent types of enemies. Falcons in particular are very fast as well. They are built to destroy transports with the pulse laser. Of course, you have the Bright Lance on there, which does help crack a transport wide open. So in that particular case, you might still want a Bright Lance on the Falcon, but the argument for the Star Cannon is a tempting one, especially because after that transport's destroyed, you're going to have a lot of Marines to kill on that objective. So, Fire Dragons can obviously take down a transport. They can take down Marines, but how many Marines can they exactly take out? Probably not all 10 of them, right? So your Falcon is going to need to make some hard choices about what and how it shoots. However, Fire Dragons and a Falcon are much more cost effective than a couple of War Walkers with Bright Lances. And that wasn't the case in the beginning of the edition. So we're already seeing some shifts there in terms of effectiveness. Fire Prisms are a very good choice as well, and I think we're going to see more of these in Pariah Nexus just because not only do they wreck transports very easily, but they also deal some good damage to Marine equivalents with their dispersed shot. On top of this, they are also able to punch past toughness 12, so things like Land Raiders, Rogaldorns, Monoliths, those types of units that Bright Lances would really struggle against, the Fire Prisms can handle no problem. Wind Riders, I think, are also here to stay because of the fact that they mulch heavy infantry like Marines very easily, and in big units can even threaten vehicles and monsters. So things like transports, right? If you're, wounding something on a 5+, they're not toughness 12 or above, then Wind Riders are actually very good against those targets, especially if you have Shroud Runner support. A unit of 9 Wind Riders, actually without Shroud Runner support, will on average kill a Rhino. Again, probably not their best target, but they can do it if they need to, and having that flexibility is something that is pretty strong. All right, so having talked about the different things that might replace the Bright Lance in cost effectiveness in the current landscape of the game, how do the other Eldar heavy weapons stack up? So Star Cannons are looking more attractive on units like Wave Serpents and Wraith Lords for the anti-marine equivalent that they bring to the table. So I will say this, I do strongly believe Wraith Lords will be decent in Pariah Nexus if they can get a small points cut. And that's just due to the fact that Wraith Lords are very good into transports like Rhinos and also, your regular Space Marine squads. The things that are going to be fighting over the objectives, the battle line type units, Wraith Lords happen to be very good against them. The only problem with the Wraith Lord, of course, is that it's expensive. So paying 160, people probably won't be comfortable with that, but maybe, 140, people will probably be a little bit more on board with that. And will be willing to give them more of a shot. And also Star Cannons on the Wraith Lord kind of offset its really bad ballista skill at 4. Not terrible, especially with the reroll to hit and wound, but, not ideal. So Star Cannons looking a little bit better at killing those types of units. Shuriken Cannons are also looking pretty awesome as well as a middle ground between anti-marine and anti-guard equivalent. So you're talking about something between killing heavy infantry and killing light infantry. As we are going to see things like Imperial Guard infantry. The new Genestealer cults came out. I don't know how strong they are, but, when there's a new codex, typically speaking, the army's going to be played. So we're going to see a lot of light infantry from them. Sisters of Battle is also out, and their infantry, while not typically light infantry, is kind of on the same level as Eldar Aspect Warriors as far as durability. So, Sisters of Battle compared to a Striking Scorpion, they basically have the same stat line. In fact, I think Striking Scorpions might be a little bit more durable. So, the Shuriken Cannon is very good at killing those types of units. So we might see, of course, more Shuriken Cannons appearing on different units as well. Sadly, though, I think the Scatter Laser and Eldar Missile Launcher are still too fringe to be that effective in balanced lists. So, in all-comers lists, I don't think they're going to be that popular. But if you're going into, for example, a lot of Imperial Guard, the Scatter Laser might be a decent choice. Or if you're going into a lot of Tyranids, the Eldar Missile Launcher might be a decent choice for that. Which is a little bit unfortunate. I do like those weapons. I just don't think they, are that effective into the meta I think we're going to be moving into. And on top of that, I do think it was a mistake that the Scatter Laser got nerfed to Strength 5 because there's very few targets in which it's actually better against than the Shuriken Cannon. Now, the last thing I want to mention is what types of units are we going to see actually take these types of weapons instead of the Bright Lance? So I think that Wave Serpents are going to be much more popular as well, and I'll probably talk about this more in depth. I did a video on it a while back, but this was kind of before Pariah Nexus was even announced. And basically, I thought that there might be a very good argument to taking Corsair Void Reavers and Wave Serpents to give them that scout move, to move them up the battlefield so that they could then, be in a better position to threaten enemy units and stuff like that. In Pariah Nexus, I think this is going to be very strong. Yes, Corsair Void Reavers are a little bit expensive, and Wave Serpents, not a lot of people like them, but they are pretty solid at 120. They just don't have a lot of firepower and a lot of punch against heavy targets. Even with a Bright Lance, it's only one twin-linked Bright Lance. And I think if we start thinking about other weapons to give the Wave Serpent, if the meta allows for it like it is now with transports being more prevalent and, things like Marines being more prevalent, I think Star Cannons and Shuriken Cannons can be a very good choice for them. As for the other Eldar units, things like Warwalkers, I think Warwalkers are generally just going to be replaced because there are more efficient options if you take other weapons on them. So if you don't take the Bright Lances and you take Shuriken Cannons, why not just take Eldar Wind Riders, for example? Or if you decide to take Star Cannons, why not just take a Falcon, which has a Pulse Laser, a Bright Lance, and a Shuriken Cannon, kind of, out-competes the Warwalker in terms of firepower, and it is able to transport a unit as well. So I think a lot of the Bright Lance toting units that we see today are not technically going to change the Bright Lance necessarily, like things like Warwalkers, but I do think on some of those more ambiguous Eldar units that Bright Lances didn't seem like the best option perhaps in some scenarios. I do think those weapons are going to be readily replaced. So in short summary, I think the Wave Serpent, the Falcon, and the Wraithlord might be good targets for a change in loadout when Pariah Nexus comes out, but I think that things like the Warwalker, Guardian Defender units, and maybe even Vipers might just keep their single Brightlance loadout, but I can definitely see Warwalkers being a little bit overshadowed by other units. So in conclusion, is the Brightlance still powerful? Absolutely, but I do think its era of domination is over due to the shift in the meta that we've witnessed since the January data slate. Now, we've already kind of seen this, but in Pariah Nexus, I do think we are going to see a lot more Fire Dragons, Harlequins, Fire Prisms, and Wind Riders filling up the Aeldari Wind Hosts in mass. And I think this means that units like the Warwalker are just not going to be as effective as they once were going forward, because they really have no way of dealing with infantry. If you look at the units that I talked about previously that I think are going to replace the Brightlance, like Fire Dragons and Fire Prisms and even Wind Riders, all of those units can deal with different types of infantry, right? From Marine equivalents to Guard equivalents. Fire Prisms have their Disperse Shot. Fire Dragons, each fire off a Melt-A-Shot, which can melt Terminators, and things like Aggressors as well, especially against 3-wound infantry, which we're definitely seeing more of. And of course, I don't even need to tell you guys about Wind Riders because we all know how fast they can melt a Marine unit. But Warwalkers, they have 2 Brightlances. If your opponent doesn't bring a ton of tanks to the battlefield, then your Warwalker is going to feel a little bit out of place, just shooting and maybe killing 1 or 2 Marines a turn. And, there are going to be matchups where the Warwalker is still going to be extremely good. I just don't think it's going to be good in every matchup going forward. Now, I could totally be wrong. The changes tomorrow could, drastically affect the effectiveness of the Brightlance, and I could be eating my words. I don't know. But we'll just have to see. My prediction on tomorrow's reveals is that the Eldar really don't get changed much. Despite, having a 48% win rate, I don't actually think we're going to see many changes. The only things I can kind of see changing are maybe Fate Dice. Maybe they increase the Fate Dice from 6 to 9, or they buff the points on things like Wraithlords. Basically units that no one has used since the beginning of the edition in highly competitive play. So we might see Wraithlords get a slight points boost. We might see Vipers drop a little bit in points. I would love to see that, of course. But yeah, in general, I don't think we're going to see that many changes. So anyway, I'm holding my breath on it. I'm crossing my fingers that we will see some good changes anyway. But it's it's a little bit doubtful. That's all. One last thing I do want to mention is that I know I've been a little bit less consistent with my uploads. I think I've, uploaded a video about every 3 days, which, I try to get one out every other day. But, I have been very busy with things, both real life, work related, and family related. So unfortunately, I haven't been able to make as many videos. But I do have more videos coming, especially with Pariah Nexus coming out. And I think you guys will enjoy some of the ones I have in store. All right, everybody, that is going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and thank you so much to all my patrons and supporters who have supported the channel for the last 1.5 years. Your help has greatly improved the channel and helped it grow considerably. If you do want to join the channel, I have free trials activated on my Patreon, so you can get in there for absolutely no cost to you. And that will grant you permanent access to our Discord community, which is a community of Eldar players and enthusiasts who love talking about strategy, tactics, and of course, hobbying. I will leave the link for that in the description below. I'm also an Amazon affiliate and have a channel store page, so if you want to grab some discounted Eldar apparel on the channel store page or some discounted Eldar miniatures on Amazon, I will also leave the links for those in the description also. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.